Hey there, Dango Stu here. In this video we're going to be making some little homemade underwater lights because these lights are a project I started working on literally a couple of years ago, and the plan was to actually build an entire ROV for exploring underwater with a camera using PVC piping to make the whole thing. And although that project sort of fell by the by, I did really like the design for the lights, something I saw on the net somewhere ages ago as well. So I just thought I'd actually finish them off and show you how they're made. Before you invest any time learning how to make these things, you're probably wondering what they're for, and that's a good question. I guess one of the obvious things for me is things like prawning, for attracting prawns for netting and all that kind of stuff. But I guess you could also use them anytime you want to light up underwater for any sort of aesthetic or search reasons, whatever. So we'll start with making the actual base where the globe is, because I need that to set for a while. So I'll show you what we do there. So if you unscrew the front section of the light, which is essentially just the lens, what I've got is a halogen light, and inside here, I don't know if you can see, inside the casing, it's actually set in a polyester resin, the whole thing. So the cable comes through the back, the entire casing set in polyester, and the light's in the front here. Now this globe's not changeable. I did experiment for a while with resining in a socket, but it was really hard to get it right. And given these globes last a while, and this bit actually isn't that hard to make up, I'd figure I'd just run with it and, you know, when the globe blows, replace it. So what this bit's made from is a standard plumbing end cap. It's a threaded 50mm end cap, and I drill a hole in the bottom here for the cable to come through. Now the cable I'm going to use is very similar to this. It's that black 2-core marine cable I've got. And the one disadvantage to this is that it's a sort of a flat profile. So it's not a very tight fit if you drill a hole. So this time I'm actually going to try and use a small drill bit and actually elongate the hole, because the tighter the fit here, the less the resin leaks out when you cast it to hold the globe in. So I'll start drilling the hole to tightly fit this cable. We'll put the cable through, then we'll attach the leads to the globe and then pour the resin in. And that's what I've ended up with. So I'll see if this cable fits. Might be just a smidge too small, which is alright. Alright, it's through now. It's a very tight fit, so it took a bit of force to get it through, but that's good, that's what you want. So now I'm just going to lift this up, strip the ends of this a little bit, and I'll solder them to the tabs on one of these globes. These are 50-watt halogens. Because of the difficulty in changing a globe, maybe an LED globe's a good choice, because I believe they're going to last longer as well. So this is what you end up with, these two pins that I'm going to solder onto. You could probably use one of those sockets and then just set the entire thing in epoxy. I don't know if the epoxy would creep in and affect the connection at all, but I don't have any here, and I think you're going to get the best connection by soldering. So I'll do that now, and then we'll pull it back through. To attach the wires to the globe, I'm going to use some connectors like this. They've got a bit of heat shrink on each end, and the center is just a bullet sort of crimp, either end, just symmetrical like that. I'm going to cut the heat shrink off one end so that it can go flush down onto the globe, and then I'll crimp the wire onto the other end. Once you've got it crimped quite tight, just check it, make sure it's not coming off. And I'll do that for the red one too. Alright, now I'm just going to hit that with the heat gun and let that heat shrink go around the cables. Now we've got a nice connection there. I'm just going to crimp these onto the ends of the globe. It's probably reasonably obvious at this stage that I'm using 12-volt globes, something I probably should have mentioned earlier. But we will be running it from the boat's battery, so that's what we need. Next thing I'm going to do is just hook the other end of this cable up to a battery, just to test those crimps and to test the globe itself. There's nothing worse than going through the next stage, which is casting it in a resin, only to find out it's a dud globe or one of your connections is bad. Alright, so that's all good. Now what I'm going to do is pull this cable back through till just a small amount of the outer casing's still inside, so we get that good seal. Now what we need to do is kind of the trickiest part of the whole thing, I think, which is find a way of keeping this globe centered. We want it pretty straight, we want it centered in here and sort of pretty horizontal parallel here for the whole time that the resin's setting. When you've got the globe in, you need it to sit quite low inside the cap here. You can't have it sitting up like this because it needs to set down in the resin in order to lock its position. Also, in order to set the resin properly, I need this cap to be sitting vertically like this. Because there's a cable coming out the bottom, I can't sit it in the bench, so I'm going to go over there and just clamp it into the vise. Alright, sitting nice and vertical, clamp not too tight, but in there firmly. The resin I'm using for this is a casting resin, so it's specifically designed for casting large objects as opposed to being like a fiberglass resin, that kind of thing. So the ratio it says between the resin and the hardener is 100 ml of resin goes to only 1.5 ml of the catalyst. So we'll mix that up in this container here and then we'll go pour it in. Once you put the hardener in, or the catalyst in, just stir it up pretty thoroughly. In the instructions it also says to pour it in sort of 5 to 10 ml layers. If you pour it all at once, it builds up quite a bit of heat and can actually crack the molds. You'll end up with a big split through it. And of course that's the last thing you want when you're trying to make a waterproof encasing. When I go to pour that resin, I'm going to take one of these with me. Now this has the matching thread for the end cap there and a bit of 50 ml pipe on this end. This pipe is pretty much a good match for these globes, and what it means is by threading this on, I'm going to stop that globe wandering around. It'll keep it perfectly centered while that resin sets. So I'll pour in this first sort of 10 ml layer. I'm just going to be really careful not to get it on these outside threads. If you drop a bit like I did there, just wipe it up really quickly while it's still not set. Alright, now to keep this centered, I'm going to go grab that top section and we'll put this on. Then I'll just rest a little bit of weight on the globe here too to keep it down, stop it springing up. Now we've got this top section here keeping this globe centered. I'm just going to put a weight on top to stop the wires springing it up. That way when it sets, it'll be as low as the wires will let it sit and it'll be dead center. Alright, while that's setting, I'm going to start making the other lens section of these lights. Now these rely on a section identical to the bit we used to keep it centered. In fact, it's exactly where it'll go. But what we do is we get another piece like this. This has been painted, but they come just plain, off-the-shelf PVC parts. They're all just from plumbing stores. This is a joiner for two 50 ml pipes. So it's got a little flange in the middle and it opens. So this section actually presses onto there. So this is the section we've already screwed on over there. And we're going to put a lens inside here, an O-ring, and then we're going to fix this in. So it'll be a lens like that, you can see. And then we'll put another O-ring in here, so when we screw it down onto the end cap, it'll be completely waterproof. Water can't get past the O-ring through the lens, can't get past the O-ring on the thread, and can't get through the resin where the wire comes in. Now there is one part in this process that's a little bit tricky, and that is obtaining these lenses. Now I use a company called Pinocchio who do laser cutting. You simply send them a CAD file, they cut them out, and they come back. They all came back, here we go, looking something like this, just covered in paper so they don't get scratched. You peel them off, all good to go. These were 55.75 millimeters across, But what I'll do is I'll dig out the old CAD file I had for those and put them somewhere in the description. So if you want to, you can just download it, send it off and get a whole of these made up. I may also just get another set made up myself and see if we can just sell them through our online store anyway if you want to buy them individually. And because this is a perfectly tight fit for the pipe that goes through here, it won't fall all the way through. It'll hit that little lip that's in the middle. Then after that, I popped an O-ring in that's once again the same diameter as the pipe. Then after that, we just need to PVC cement this in until it presses hard against that O-ring. To glue this section in now to where the lens is pretty straightforward. There's a red sort of priming fluid that you put on first, wipe that on, let it dry for 10 seconds really, then put a bit of the glue which essentially melts the PVC. It's actually a weld more than a glue. You put it on both sides, push them in, hold them together for a few minutes, and you've pretty much got a permanent watertight seal. I'm just using a rag to wipe this primer around the outside here. I'm going to wipe in here with the lens out. Then we're just going to get a little brush and put the cement section on, which I think they call a type N. We want a pretty uniform coat of this cement because we don't want any section that leaks at all. And then I'm just going to wipe a little bit on the inside here, but I'm just going to do it vertically so I don't drip it onto the lens at all. So if it does drip, it drips away from it. Okay. Then just press them together. Then I'm going to push all the way down so that the edge of this section here is pressing hard against that O-ring, because that's what's going to make that lens seal. Once again, I'm just going to pop a bit of weight on. So on the packet it says essentially hold 30 seconds, then don't disturb for 5 minutes. So I'm just going to leave them sitting like that for the 5 minutes. All right, now this leftover resin is getting close to set, but it's really hot. So I don't really want to go and add any more resin to that one yet. We're going to let that cool down a little bit, continue to set, and then we'll make up a new batch and put another layer on. These ones that I made years ago when I first started experimenting with these, I painted this section first. That way it just makes it nice and easy to make sure you don't get any paint on the lens at all. So if you are going to paint them, just do it first before you assemble it. This leftover resin from the first layer is starting to cool now, so I'm going to mix up that next batch and pour another layer. Once again, just going to wipe this little drip off the thread. The globe's set pretty much in position because of that first layer, so I'm going to leave this collar off, just let the heat escape a bit more easily. All right, let that set and then we can just put it together. It's the following morning now, and this one we did yesterday is set quite nicely. So you can see the globe there, you can see it, and all the wiring's completely set in that resin. And the resin hasn't cracked or anything, which is good, so it didn't go off too quickly or get too hot. This side just goes straight into resin, so even if water gets in this little crack, it's not going to get far at all. If you have this hole too big, the resin is thin enough to actually run down the cable, so the first few I did didn't go so well until I started making the effort to have that hole the exact size and shape of the cable. I'm going to pop this light into one of the original lenses I made, given I bothered to paint them. But before I do that, I'm just going to pop another O-ring here. If you have a look in the threaded section, there's a lip at the very back of the thread. And so that O-ring will sit on that little shelf there. Then if I screw that down all the way, that threaded section will just press up against that O-ring. And the whole thing should be sealed up quite nicely. Given I've got a couple of fittings and a couple of lenses left, I'm going to try one other design just so when I actually put them in the water we can see whether it's necessary or not, and that is having an O-ring on both sides of the lens. So on this 50mm coupler, I'm just going to drop an O-ring in first onto the little middle lip, drop the lens down, then drop another O-ring on top of that. Now I'm just going to go through the same process of putting the primer and the PVC cement on and putting these together. I also found if I put too much pressure on it, you can actually start to push the O-ring out. So I decided to go with a little bit more of a moderate pressure when I'm letting this cement set. Well, it wouldn't be much of a video if we didn't give these lights a try. So I've come out here now. I'm just going to hook them straight up to the battery. My plan down the track is to actually wire a bit of a socket down the back of the boat where I can plug these sorts of things in, a bit of a power socket like you might have a cigarette lighter socket on a car. So I'll look at that in the future. But in the meantime, we'll just wire them straight to the battery and pop them in the water and see what sort of light we get out of them. I would also like to put some sort of handle on these. When you look at prawning and flounder lights, they generally have a metre and a half handle on them. My plan is to actually use like a metal hose clamp to attach just a pole to the side of the light, just clamp them together like that. But I just haven't had a chance lately, it's been a bit busy, so we'll sort of make do what we got and just give them a little trial. Pretty flaky connection, just put the wires straight under the terminals, no fuse, no switch, no nothing yet, but we'll get to that down the track. So wired up and let's pop it in the water. So the first thing I notice is it floats pretty well because of the air inside the light. But it gives a pretty good light underwater. I think it's going to be pretty good for what it's designed for, which is basically mostly for prawning. At least you get to see all the growth on my sponson. It's not a good look, is it? Never mind. So it's obviously handy on deck as well as a little bit of a portable light, which is nice. I might even think about making some mounting brackets for them where I can pop them in a holder and actually have them in fixed positions. Just something else I could do down the track. It's also probably pretty good for telling ghost stories. You know, you can sort of do this. Ooh. Anyway, so far I'm pretty happy with it. It seems to work. I think there's lots of different uses for them. I certainly think the primary use for me would be as a prawning light, so I'm definitely going to do a video on that down the track. Maybe just do a video on going out and see whether we can catch any prawns or shrimps, depending on what part of the world you're in. And but in the meantime, I think it's just nice to have a completely waterproof light that runs off the main battery here as well. And it's got a lead definitely long enough to sort of move to any part of the boat. So I certainly think I'm glad to have it on board. It's good to have this sort of waterproof light with endless power from the main battery rather than having a torch on board, although I think a torch is handy for its cordless nature, you know. But I'm also just really interested in this particular style of construction. I think you can make all sorts of things for boats from PVC. It's completely waterproof, it's pretty UV proof, it's very simple to build quite strong things using it. So I hope if anything it just gives you an idea of the types of things you can make from standard plumbing parts and sort of whets your appetite or, you know, stimulates your imagination a bit to see what other things you could make for your boat. Alright, we'll wrap it up here. Next week we'll definitely be getting back to the Evinrude. That's sort of got to go in the water next week, so it's definitely on the home stretch. A few things have been happening and I have filmed a little bit of it, but it just wasn't really a complete video for this weekend. That's why I sort of dived into this little project as something to sort of fill the gap a bit. Alright, well take care. Please rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. See ya. Bye.